You really think she loves you?" Daniel leaned in close, his voice dropping to something sharp and quiet, the kind of quiet that cuts. "You're just a performance, a prop she borrowed for the weekend. The moment this is over, she'll forget your name." He smiled when he said it. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the words, the smile. The comfortable, unbothered smile of a man who had spent years making Claire feel small and still believed he had the right. He was wrong about everything, but he was about to find that out in front of every single person who mattered. If this story moves you, subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far the truth travels. I want to be clear about something before I tell you this story. I am not the kind of man women write love songs about. I'm not tall in that dramatic way. I don't have a mysterious past or a jaw that could cut glass. I'm 32 years old and I own a coffee shop, a small one, on a side street in Charleston, South Carolina that most people don't find unless they're already lost or they live in the neighborhood. My regulars are mostly retired teachers, night shift nurses grabbing a cup before sunrise, and two older gentlemen named Harold and Frank who have been arguing about college football in the same corner booth every single Saturday morning for the past 4 years. That's my life. That's who I am. My name is Ethan Brooks, and for most of my adult life, I had convinced myself that simple was enough. That quiet was good. That a man didn't need fireworks or grand gestures or a love story worth telling. He just needed to show up every day, do his work with care, and be kind to the people who crossed his path. I believed that right up until the night everything changed. It was a Thursday, late October. The kind of rain that doesn't fall dramatically, it just hangs in the air, cold and miserable, soaking into your clothes before you even realize it's happening. I had already flipped the sign to closed and was wiping down the espresso machine when I heard the door. I hadn't locked it yet, my fault. I turned around ready to say, "Sorry, we're closed," and the words just stopped in my throat. She was standing in the doorway, dripping wet, still wearing her hospital badge clipped to the front of her scrubs, her dark hair plastered to the side of her face. She looked like someone who had run a marathon, lost, and then been told the race wasn't over yet. Her eyes were red around the edges, but she wasn't crying. She looked like someone who had already finished crying a long time ago and had simply run out of the energy required to start again. I recognized her, not from a date, not from a party. From the shop, she had been coming in for months, always early morning, always the same order, a medium oat milk latte with 1 pump of vanilla and no foam. She always paid exact change, always said thank you twice, and always left $1 in the tip jar, even on the days when she looked like she could barely afford the coffee. I knew she was a nurse. I knew she worked long shifts because she sometimes came in with the same tired look she was wearing right now. Like her body had been running on caffeine and obligation for so long it had forgotten what rest felt like. But I didn't know her name. She walked up to the counter slowly, like she wasn't completely sure she wanted to be there. And then she reached into the pocket of her scrubs and placed a small white envelope on the counter between us. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at it. Then she looked at me. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to hear me out before you say no." I looked at the envelope. I looked at her. "Okay," I said. She took a slow breath. "I need you to pretend to be my fiancé." The hum of the refrigerator, the rain against the windows. That's all there was in the shop for about 5 full seconds, while my brain worked through what she had just said. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Can you say that again?" "My ex-boyfriend is getting married this weekend," she said. "His name is Daniel, and he's marrying my best friend. My former best friend. And I have to go to this wedding because if I don't show up, it will look like I never got over him. And I cannot. I will not give him the satisfaction of that." She pushed the envelope toward me slightly. "There's $800 in there. I know that's not a lot, but it's what I have. I just need you to show up, hold my hand, smile at the right moments, and get me through a single weekend without falling apart in front of people who already think I'm broken." I stared at the envelope. Then I looked back up at her. "You don't know my name," I said. Something flickered across her face. "Claire," she said. "My name is Claire Mitchell. I know you're Ethan because I've heard your employees call you that. And you make the best oat milk latte in the city." She paused. "I know this is insane, I know that, but I'm asking anyway." There was something in her voice that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't desperation exactly. It was more like dignity trying to survive something that was actively trying to destroy it. I looked at the envelope again. "What happened?" I asked. "With Daniel." She blinked. Like that wasn't the question she expected. He left me, she said, about 2 years ago. We had been together for 4 years. I thought we were building something. And then I found out he had been with my best friend Sarah for the last 7 months of our relationship. Behind my back, both of them. She said it flatly, like she had rehearsed the words so many times they had lost their edges. And they're getting married now. At a mansion in the Lowcountry. And my entire family is going to be there. Because apparently everyone still stays close to Daniel even after what he did. I let that sit for a moment. And your family knows you're coming alone. My mother called me 3 days ago to ask if I'd found anyone yet. The corner of her mouth tightened. She used the phrase, someone to take care of you, in 2024. She actually said that. I almost laughed. I didn't. And that's when you decided to find a fake fiancé. I don't usually make decisions like this, she said. And she sounded like she meant it. But I had a patient today, 26 years old, car accident. And I held his hand in the ER for 40 minutes, while we waited on his family to get there, and he kept saying he was afraid to die alone. And I kept saying, you're not alone, I'm right here. And somewhere in the middle of that, I thought I have to stop being afraid too. I have to stop letting other people define what my life looks like. She straightened slightly. So yes, I walked into a coffee shop and asked the man who makes my latte every morning to pretend to be my fiancé. Because I am done arriving at places alone and waiting for people to feel sorry for me. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Because here's the thing about that speech. She wasn't performing it. She wasn't trying to convince me with it. She just told me the truth about where it came from. The way someone tells a truth they've been carrying so long it's gotten too heavy to hold alone. I pushed the envelope back across the counter. I don't want your money, I said. Her face fell. I'm not saying no, I added quickly. I'm saying, I don't want money for this. She studied me with the kind of look nurses probably develop where they're reading your vitals without a machine. Then what do you want? I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Someday, I said, you'll owe me a favor. I don't know what it'll be. Nothing crazy. She stared at me. That's it? That's it. She blinked a couple of times. And then, for the first time since she walked in, she laughed. A real one. Surprised out of her, the kind that happens before you can stop it. Okay, she said. Deal. I extended my hand and she shook it, and I remember thinking her grip was strong and steady and felt like someone who had learned not to let go easily. Neither of us knew yet what we were actually agreeing to. The next 2 days were the strangest kind of preparation I've ever done for anything. We met at a diner about 6 blocks from the hospital, her suggestion, neutral ground, somewhere we could talk without anyone we knew seeing us. She brought a notebook, an actual spiral notebook, like we were studying for an exam. She flipped it open and looked at me across the table with complete seriousness. We need a story, she said. They're going to ask how we met, how long we've been together when we got engaged. We need all of it to be consistent, because my mother will quiz you separately from me, I guarantee it. Okay, I said. So how did we meet? She tapped her pen on the notebook. We met at the shop. That part's easy because it's true enough. We just need to move it back. Say we've been together about 8 months. 8 months, I repeated. And things got serious. How fast? Pretty fast, she said. She hesitated. Steady, that's the word. You feel steady. So it makes sense that I would trust you quickly. I looked at her when she said that. She wasn't looking at me. She was writing in the notebook. And the engagement, I asked. Dinner, she said. Somewhere simple. You don't like flashy things, you said. She paused. You said you wanted it to be just the two of us. No audience, because the moment was ours, and you didn't want to share it with strangers. The diner was quiet between us for a second. That's a very specific detail, I said. She looked up from the notebook. Her pen stopped. Too much? No, I said slowly. It just sounds like something someone would actually say. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down. Let's keep going. We spent 2 hours in that diner, building a timeline, filling in details, testing each other on the answers. What's her favorite movie, she told me, then immediately argued with herself about whether it was that or a different one. What's my coffee order? She already knew it because she'd overheard it. What did our first real fight look like? We had to invent that one from scratch. And she laughed harder at that question than I'd seen her laugh at anything. We fought about directions, I offered. She pointed at me. Yes, that is so specific it sounds true. It's because it is true. I got into an actual argument about directions with someone I dated 3 years ago, and I still think I was right. Were you? Technically yes, but emotionally no. She wrote it down. What I noticed sitting across from her for those 2 hours was that the story we were building was like a frame around a picture that already existed. We hadn't invented the coffee shop she really had been coming in for months. We hadn't invented the fact that I knew her order I really did. We hadn't invented the fact that she smiled differently when she talked about her patients, or that she always looked exhausted but never beaten, or that she left $1 in the tip jar even on the bad days. We were just drawing a line around things that were already there. I don't think either of us talked about that out loud. The day before the wedding, Claire called me. "We have a problem," she said. "What kind of problem?" "My family wants to do dinner tonight. Before the wedding, my mother has apparently decided that she needs to meet you in person tonight, or she's going to assume I made you up." There was a short silence. "How did she word that exactly?" I asked. She said, and I quote, "Claire Elizabeth Mitchell, if this man is real, he will come to dinner." I could hear the tension beneath the flat delivery. "Okay," I said, "what time?" Another short silence. "You don't have to, Claire." "What time?" 7 o'clock. "My parents' house. I'll be there at 6:55. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice had lost some of its armor. "Thank you," she said, and she sounded like she meant every syllable. I showed up in the one nice shirt I owned that still fit properly and spent 5 seconds on the front porch of her parents' house, trying to remember which details I was supposed to have memorized. Her mother's name was Patricia. Her father was Robert but went by Bob. Her older brother was named Marcus, had 2 kids, and apparently asked questions like a man who believed he was conducting a job interview. Her younger sister Jenna was 28 and was described by Claire as the nice one, but also the one who notices everything. So don't let your guard down. I knocked on the door. Claire answered it. She was wearing a dark blue dress, and she had her hair down, and for a second I forgot what I was supposed to be doing there because I had only ever seen her in scrubs, and she looked different. Not in a way I could describe without sounding ridiculous. Just different. "You actually came," she said. "I said I would." She stepped back to let me in and quietly, close enough that only I could hear her, she said, "My mother is already stationed at the dining room table, and she has been cooking since noon. Marcus is in the kitchen, pretending to help but actually interrogating. Jenna knows something is off, but she's choosing to be kind about it. My father hasn't said anything yet, which is either very good or very bad." "Got it," I said. "Ready?" "No," she said honestly. "Good, me neither. Let's go." The dining room was warm and too bright, and smelled like a meal that someone had put genuine love into. But Patricia Mitchell was a small woman with sharp eyes, and a smile that went up but didn't quite make it all the way to genuine the moment she saw me. She was sizing me up before I'd taken 3 steps. "So," she said, "you're the man who swept my daughter off her feet." "I don't know about swept," I said. She walked into my shop and I just kept showing up. Patricia's eyes sharpened, not with suspicion, with interest. Like that wasn't the answer she expected. "Sit," she said. "You're too tall, and I can't see your face properly." I sat. Marcus was on my left, arms crossed, already studying me like I had arrived with a suspicious briefcase. He was a big man, broader than me, and he had the specific energy of an older brother who had watched his sister get her heart broken, and had been waiting 2 years to make someone pay for it. "What kind of business is the coffee shop?" he asked. No preamble, no small talk. "Family owned," I said. "I took it over from my uncle 3 years ago when his knees gave out. We've been in that location for about 9 years total." "Profitable?" Marcus, Claire said. "It's a fair question," he said without looking at her. "Some months yes, some months no," I said. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The rent's what it is and the margins on coffee are what they are. But we've never missed a payment, and I've never had to let someone go because we couldn't make payroll." I paused, which I'm proud of more than anything on paper. There was a brief silence. Bob Mitchell, Claire's father, spoke for the first time. He was sitting at the head of the table, quiet and still the way people are when they're actually listening. "My father ran a hardware store," he said. "He used to say the same thing. He said the day he had to let somebody go was the day he stopped sleeping right." "Yes, sir," I said. "Exactly." Bob nodded once and didn't say anything else. But something shifted in the room. Dinner was a kind of performance and a kind of truth happening simultaneously. Claire and I had rehearsed our answers, but the questions her family asked weren't quite the ones we'd prepared for. They didn't ask the big obvious things, they asked the small things. Whether I called when I said I would. Whether I remembered things she told me. Whether I'd ever seen her cry and what I'd done about it. I answered all of them, and most of what I said was true. Because here's the thing I realized at that table. I had been paying attention to Claire Mitchell for months without ever meaning to. I knew she had bad weeks and good weeks by the way she ordered her coffee. I knew she worked double shifts when the ER was short-staffed because she'd come in twice in one day, and her eyes would be that particular shade of worn out that comes from caring too much for too long. I knew she tipped better when she looked the worst. Like generosity was how she kept herself from going hollow. I hadn't known I was storing any of that, but it was all there. After dinner, while Patricia disappeared to bring out dessert, and Marcus had stepped outside to take a call, Jenna leaned across the table toward me. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said quietly. "Sure," I said. "Are you actually in love with her?" I didn't flinch. I didn't look at Claire. I looked at Jenna directly. "I think," I said carefully, "that I am the kind of person who gets there slowly. And I think Claire is the kind of person who deserves someone who gets there slowly and then stays." Jenna studied me for a long moment. Then she sat back. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." Claire found me in the hallway 15 minutes later while coats were being retrieved and goodbyes were being exchanged. She pulled me slightly away from everyone else, and her voice was very low. "My father told Marcus he liked you," she said. "That has never happened before. With anyone." "I like him too," I said. She looked at me, and it was a different kind of look than the one from the counter 3 days ago. That one had been practical. This one was trying to figure something out. "Why are you being this?" She stopped. "This what?" She shook her head slightly. "Nothing. Never mind." "Claire," she met my eyes. "Why are you being this real about it?" she said finally. "You could have shown up and smiled and answered questions. You didn't have to actually be present." I thought about that. "Because you asked me to come," I said, "so I came." She looked at me for another moment, and I couldn't tell what she was thinking. Then her mother called her name from the other room, and the moment broke apart. But I drove home that night with the quiet, unsettled feeling of someone who has just started a story they didn't mean to write. And somewhere, beneath that, somewhere I wasn't ready to look at directly yet, was the recognition that pretending to be in love with Claire Mitchell was going to be a great deal more complicated than I had originally bargained for. Because I had sat at her family's dinner table for 3 hours. I had answered every question, and I hadn't lied once. Not about the important things, not about what I noticed, not about what I remembered, not about what staying meant to me. Every word I said to her family was the version of truth I didn't have permission to say directly. And tomorrow, we were walking into a wedding together. And Daniel Whitmore, the man who made her feel like she wasn't enough, was going to be watching every single moment. And I was going to have to keep pretending. Except I was beginning to understand, in a way that settled somewhere deep and unsteady in my chest, that I wasn't pretending anything. I was just finally saying what was already true. And that terrified me more than anything else I had agreed to that week. The morning of the wedding, Ethan woke up at 4:45 without an alarm. Not because he was excited, because he hadn't slept properly in 3 days, and his body had given up pretending otherwise. He lay there in the dark for a while, staring at the ceiling, running through the details Claire had drilled into him, like a man studying for a final exam he hadn't asked to take. 8 months together, engaged after a quiet dinner. First fight about directions. Her favorite color was a deep navy blue, not because it was glamorous, but because it reminded her of the sky right before sunrise when she drove to the hospital and felt like the whole world was still hers before the shift began. Her coffee order, her laugh. The way she said thank you twice, always twice, like once was never quite enough. He knew all of it. The problem was, he wasn't sure anymore which parts he had memorized and which parts he had simply noticed. He got up, made himself coffee the real kind, the kind he made for himself before the shop opened. The one nobody else knew about, because he never put it on the menu, and sat at his kitchen table with both hands around the mug, and tried to have an honest conversation with himself. "What exactly are you doing, Ethan?" The honest answer was this: he didn't know anymore. He had agreed to this because something in Claire Mitchell's voice that rainy Thursday night had hit him somewhere below logic and above pride, in the exact place where a person keeps the things they can't quite explain. He had agreed because she looked like someone who needed one person in the world to simply show up. And showing up was the one thing in his entire life that Ethan Brooks had never once failed to do. But he had not agreed to sit across from her family and mean every word he said. He had not agreed to lie awake at night, thinking about the way she laughed when he suggested the fight about directions. He had not agreed to drive home from her parents' dinner cook, feeling like something had been quietly rearranged inside his chest without his permission. His phone buzzed, a text from Claire, 5:43 in the morning. It said, "I'm already regretting this and I haven't even put on the dress yet." He smiled before he could stop himself. He typed back, "That's probably a good sign. Regret means you still care enough to be nervous. If you felt nothing, you'd be in trouble." 3 dots. "Then when did you get wise?" He wrote back, "I've been awake since 4:45. Sleep deprivation does things to a man." A longer pause. "Then me too, I didn't sleep." He looked at that message for a moment. Then he typed, "You're going to be fine today, Claire. I promise." He didn't know if that was true, but he meant it more than he'd meant most things he'd said in the past year. She sent back a single word, "Okay," and then, after a pause, "Thank you, Ethan." He set the phone down and finished his coffee and got dressed and told himself, for the last time, to keep it together because this was about her and not about him. And whatever was happening in his chest was something he could deal with later. After the weekend, after everything was over, and they had gone back to being strangers who knew each other's coffee orders. He told himself that. He almost believed it. They arrived at the venue together in Ethan's truck because Claire said her car was making a noise she didn't trust on the highway, which he later realized was her way of making sure they arrived as a unit rather than separately. She had thought of everything, every angle, every potential observation someone might make. She had been planning this like a military operation, while simultaneously working double shifts at the hospital and sleeping 4 hours a night. He picked her up at her apartment at 10. When she came to the door, he didn't say anything for a moment. She was wearing a dress the color of deep wine, and her hair was pinned in a way that looked casual but wasn't. And she had that look on her face that nurses sometimes get before something difficult begins, completely still, completely prepared, not quite present yet. "You look," he started. "Don't," she said. "If you say something nice, I'm going to lose my composure in the doorway and we have a 3-hour drive." He nodded. "Okay, you ready?" "No," she said, "let's go." They drove for a while in silence. The kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable but needs to be treated carefully because it's holding something fragile. About 40 minutes in, Claire turned her face slightly toward the window and said quietly, "He called me last week." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Daniel called you?" "He said he wanted to make sure I was doing well. That there were no hard feelings." A pause. "He said he hoped I'd be happy for him." The silence after that had a different quality. "What did you say?" Ethan asked. "I said I would be there with my fiancé and I wished him the best. And then I hung up and sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 20 minutes. She was still looking at the window. He didn't call to check on me. He called to feel good about himself. He wanted me to absolve him. 2 years of what he did, and he wanted me to tell him on the phone that we were fine, that I was fine, so he could walk down that aisle with a clean conscience." Ethan's jaw tightened. He kept his voice even. "Did he get what he wanted?" "No," she said, "he did not." Something about the way she said it, the quiet certainty of it, made him exhale slowly. "Good," he said. She turned from the window then and looked at him directly, and he could feel it, even though he was watching the road. "Ethan, if this gets bad today, if it gets to a point where it's too much and you want to walk it back, just squeeze my hand twice. I'll give you an out." He glanced at her briefly. "I'm not going to need an out. You don't know that yet." Another pause. Then she turned back to the window and he heard her exhale, long and slow, and when she spoke again her voice was different. Smaller, the hospital armor was off. "I just don't want to fall apart in front of him," she said. "That's all I want. I don't need to win anything. I don't need him to regret it. I just want to walk out of there intact." He glanced at her again. "You will. You sound very certain for a man who agreed to this 4 days ago." "I agreed to it because I was certain," he said. She looked at him. He could feel it. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push, and they drove the rest of the way, with a quietness between them that felt, strangely, like the most honest conversation he'd had in months. The venue was the kind of place that existed to make people feel small. A plantation-style estate spread across a sweep of manicured property, white columns and overflow of flowers, and the specific kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself loudly because it doesn't have to. Valets in matching jackets, string quartet warming up near the entrance. Women in dresses that cost more than a month of Ethan's rent. Claire saw it all and said nothing. He watched her shoulders set as they walked from the parking area toward the entrance. The way she lifted her chin without thinking about it. The way she tucked her hand into the crook of his arm and gripped lightly but steadily, like someone holding a railing on a boat. "You're doing great," he said quietly. "I haven't done anything yet," she said. "You're walking toward it," he said. "That counts." She didn't respond, but he felt her grip steady. The first person to see them was a woman in a champagne-colored dress who shrieked Claire's name from 15 feet away and came rushing over with her arms out. One of Claire's old friends from before, someone named Lauren, who had apparently remained friends with both Claire and Daniel after the split, which made her the specific kind of person who smiled warmly while collecting information for both sides. "Claire, oh my God, you look incredible." A hug, then immediately stepping back to look at Ethan with the particular hunger of someone who had been waiting for this specific piece of data. "And this is him, this is Ethan." "Hi, Lauren," Ethan said. He smiled. The easy one, the one he used when he needed people to relax. "I've heard a lot about you." He hadn't. Claire hadn't mentioned her once. But Lauren beamed like she'd been validated in a deeply personal way and immediately launched into a series of questions that came fast and slightly breathless. "How long? Where did you meet? When did you know?" And Ethan answered all of them smoothly, calmly, without looking at Claire to check his answers. 8 months. The coffee shop, naturally. I knew pretty early. She walked in one morning looking like she'd already saved 3 lives before breakfast. And I thought, well, there goes any chance of a normal day. Lauren laughed. Claire looked at him from the side of her eye, with an expression he couldn't entirely read. They moved inside, and then Ethan saw Daniel Whitmore for the first time. He was across the room, tall, polished, the kind of handsome that came from good genes and a personal trainer and the particular confidence of a man who had never been left behind in his life. He was surrounded by friends in suits, laughing at something. And he had the energy of a man who believed completely in the rightness of his own story. Then he looked across the room and saw Claire. And Ethan watched something pass through Daniel's face that he recognized immediately, because it was exactly what Daniel didn't want anyone to see. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't remorse. It was something smaller and uglier than that. It was the look of a man who had been expecting to see a woman diminished and was startled to find her standing straight. Daniel's eyes moved to Ethan. They stayed there for exactly 3 seconds. Then Daniel smiled and looked it away and went back to his conversation, like he hadn't just taken the full measure of a man from across a room. Ethan filed that away. Claire's family arrived in stages over the next 30 minutes. Her mother found them first, sweeping in with the energy of a woman who was operating at full maternal surveillance capacity and wearing it like perfume. "You came," Patricia said to Ethan, as though this confirmed something critical. "I said I would, Mrs. Mitchell," he said. "You did." She looked at him for a moment with those sharp eyes from the dinner, and then she did something he hadn't expected. She touched his arm briefly, just once. "My daughter doesn't bring people to things like this," she said quietly. "Not anymore." He nodded. "I know," he said. Patricia looked at him for another beat. Then she moved to Claire, and the two of them had a quick, murmured exchange that Ethan gave them space for, stepping back just enough to be respectful. Marcus arrived next with his wife and children and gave Ethan the kind of handshake men give when they're testing something without admitting they're testing it. Ethan held the grip steady and met his eyes, and Marcus nodded one short, decisive nod, and that was apparently enough. Jenna arrived last and found Ethan immediately, and said nothing, just raised one eyebrow at him, and smiled like they shared a private understanding, which after the dining room conversation, they did. The ceremony was beautiful, the way things can be beautiful when you have money and taste, and a wedding planner who charges by the hour. Ethan sat beside Claire with their hands loosely linked and did not watch the ceremony. He watched Claire, because Daniel and Sarah walking down that aisle together meant something to Claire that no amount of preparation had fully armored her against, and he needed to know the exact moment she needed him. He knew the moment. It was when the officiant said the words about choosing each other, about deciding every day to love the person standing in front of you. Claire's hand tightened on his, not dramatically, just by a fraction. Just enough that he felt it. He turned his hand over, under hers, and held it properly. She didn't look at him, but the tightness in her fingers eased. During the cocktail hour that followed, Daniel made his move. He materialized at Ethan's elbow while Claire was across the room with Jenna, smooth and casual as someone who had planned the moment and didn't want it to look like planning. "Ethan, right?" He extended a hand. "Daniel Whitmore. Congratulations on the engagement. Claire seems happy." She is, Ethan said. He shook the hand, matched the grip. She deserves it, Daniel said, with the specific tone of a man delivering magnanimous forgiveness to a situation he believes he controls. She and I had our time, but it ran its course. I hope there's no weirdness. No weirdness, Ethan said. Daniel studied him for just a half-second longer than a normal follow-up study takes. So how'd you two meet? I didn't even know she was seeing anyone. Coffee shop, Ethan said. She came in one morning and I made her a latte, and apparently I did it right. Daniel chuckled. The kind of chuckle that happens in the throat and doesn't involve the eyes. A coffee shop owner. A brief pause that carried weight it wasn't supposed to carry. That must be a good life. It is, Ethan said simply. Something shifted in Daniel's face. He'd expected something else. Defensiveness, maybe. An apology for existing. He hadn't gotten it. Well, Daniel said, enjoy the reception. Congratulations on the wedding, Ethan said. You're a lucky man, and he walked away first. Small moment. But it mattered. Claire was watching from across the room, and when their eyes met, she tilted her head slightly in a question, and he gave her a small shake of his head, meaning fine. Everything is fine. She exhaled and turned back to Jenna. Dinner was long and layered and full of the specific tension that comes when 50 people in a room know the backstory and are all pretending they don't. Ethan sat beside Claire, and they ate and talked and did what they had agreed to do, which was be present and be believable. Except that somewhere in the third course, when Claire was telling a story about a patient that had made her laugh, a real story, not for performance, just something that had happened last week that she found funny, Ethan realized he had stopped paying attention to the room. He was just listening to her, just her. The way her voice moved when she talked about something she cared about. The way she used her hands more than she probably realized. The way she would start to say something and then take a slight detour, because she remembered a better detail and then come back to the original point without losing the thread. He was just listening and he was content. That was the word. He was simply, quietly, genuinely content to be sitting exactly where he was. That frightened him more than Daniel's handshake. Because content meant comfortable. And comfortable meant real. And real was not what they had agreed to. It was Jenna who said it out loud first. She leaned across the table during a brief lull and looked at both of them with the expression of someone who has been watching carefully for a long time and has finally made up their mind. You two aren't pretending, she said. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear. Completely matter of fact. Like she was reporting a weather observation. Claire went very still. Ethan didn't move either. Jenna, Claire said, and her voice had a warning in it. I'm not telling anyone, Jenna said. I'm just saying, whatever started as whatever it was, it's not that anymore. She looked at Ethan specifically. You watch her the way people watch things. They're afraid to lose. The table between them was very quiet for a moment. Then Ethan said, I think maybe you should tell me more about the patient story, Claire. You never finished it. Claire looked at him. Her sister looked at him. And then something moved through Claire's expression that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite fear. It was the look of someone who had been offered a door and wasn't sure yet if they were allowed to walk through it. Right, she said, so the patient. And she kept talking. But her hand underneath the table found his, and she didn't let go for the rest of the meal. After dinner, while the reception shifted into dancing and the lights went lower and the string quartet gave way to something with more rhythm, Claire found a quiet spot near the edge of the room, and Ethan followed her there without being asked. Jenna isn't wrong, Claire said. She was looking out at the dance floor, not at him. He stood beside her. I know, he said. That wasn't part of the agreement. No, he said, it wasn't. A pause. The music was something slow and warm. Across the room, Daniel was dancing with his new wife and looking exactly like a man who believed he had everything he wanted. When I was with Daniel, Claire said, I spent 4 years trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. Why I wasn't enough. Why he looked at his phone more than he looked at me. Why he came home late more than he came home on time. I kept shrinking. She said the word like it had weight. I kept making myself smaller, thinking if I took up less space he'd notice the space I was filling. Ethan was quiet. He noticed the space when I left, she said. He called it moving on. He called me last week to feel good about himself, Ethan said. That's not moving on. That's still watching you. She turned to look at him then. You saw that too, she said. First thing when we walked in, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. He's going to do something tonight, she said. I can feel it. He doesn't like that he can't read you. He expected someone he could dismiss. He's welcome to try, Ethan said quietly. Something shifted in Claire's expression. Something private and complicated and almost hopeful. Ethan, she said. Yeah. Why did you actually say yes? She said it like she'd been holding the question for a week and had finally decided to ask it directly. Not the favor. Not the favor version. Why did you actually say yes? He thought about it. He thought about the rain and the envelope and the way she'd stood at that counter with her hospital badge, still clipped to her scrubs, and her dignity still intact, even though she was asking a near stranger to walk into the worst weekend of her year. Because you walked into my shop every morning for months, he said. And you always ordered the same thing, and you always said thank you twice. And you always left $1 in the tip jar, even when you looked like you were running on empty. He paused. And I thought whoever left that woman behind must be the biggest fool in Charleston, South Carolina. Claire didn't move. And I thought, he continued, that I didn't want to be the second man who let her walk back out into the rain. The room was still around them. The music kept moving. Across the dance floor, people laughed and held each other, and didn't know that the most real conversations at this entire wedding was happening in a corner between a coffee shop owner and a nurse who had asked him to pretend. Claire looked at him for a long, searching moment, and then she said very quietly, I think I'm in serious trouble. Yeah, he said, me too, she laughed, low and a little broken and completely real. And she leaned her head, just slightly, just barely, against his shoulder. And he let her. And neither of them spoke about what that meant. Not yet, because across the room, Daniel Whitmore had stopped dancing. And he was watching them with the expression of a man who had just realized that the story he thought he was telling had a different ending than the one he planned. And tomorrow, he was going to try to rewrite it. Daniel Whitmore moved through a room the way certain men do when they've spent their whole lives being the most important person in it. Slowly, with purpose, like everyone else was set dressing and he was the only one with actual lines. Ethan noticed it from the moment they arrived. He noticed it the way you notice a splinter before it breaks skin, not painful yet, but present. Insistent, something that needs to be dealt with eventually. By 9 o'clock that night, eventually had arrived. The reception had shifted into its later hours. The formal dinner was done, the toasts had been given, and the dance floor had filled with the particular loose joy of people who had finished their second glass of wine and decided the evening belonged to them. The lights were lower, the music had gotten warmer, and somewhere in that shift, the careful architecture of the evening had relaxed, just enough for the wrong things to happen. Ethan had been watching Daniel for the last hour. Not obviously. Not in a way that anyone would notice, but the way you watch someone when your instincts have already told you that something is coming, and your eyes are just waiting for the confirmation. Daniel laughed too loudly at things that weren't quite funny. He touched his new wife's arm in the specific way of a man performing affection for an audience. And every 7 or 8 minutes, his eyes moved across the room to wherever Claire was standing, like a compass needle that couldn't help but find its north. Even when north was the last direction it was supposed to point. Claire didn't see it. She was talking with Marcus and his wife near the bar. Her posture easier now than it had been hours ago, the tension in her shoulders finally starting to release. Jenna was beside her, laughing at something Marcus said. Her father Bob had found a chair near the edge of the room, and was sitting in it with the satisfied quiet of a man who had fulfilled his social obligations for the evening and was now simply waiting to go home. Ethan was getting them both water from a side table when Daniel appeared at his elbow. No greeting this time, no handshake. The cocktail hour pleasantness was gone, and what was underneath it was less polished. Walk with me, Daniel said. Not a question. Ethan looked at him. Sure, he said. They moved to a quieter corridor off the main hall, past a server carrying empty champagne flutes, into a space where the music was muffled and they were mostly alone. Daniel stopped and turned and crossed his arms and looked at Ethan, with the expression of a man who had spent the evening building up to this conversation, and believed he had the upper hand in it. I'm going to be straight with you, Daniel said. I'd appreciate that, Ethan said. I know about the arrangement. The air in the corridor didn't change. Ethan didn't move. He kept his face neutral and his breathing even, and he said, What arrangement is that? The engagement, Daniel said. The fake one. He said the word fake with a particular satisfaction, like placing a card on a table that he believes ends the game. I have a friend, Lauren. She's known Claire for years and she has a big heart and a very small capacity for keeping things to herself. A short pause. Claire apparently asked 3 different people before she asked you. None of them said yes. Lauren thought it was sad. She told me last week. Ethan looked at him for a moment, and he said. Daniel blinked. That wasn't the reaction he'd prepared for. And you're standing in the middle of my wedding, pretending to be engaged to my ex-girlfriend. I think I'm owed more than. You're owed nothing, Ethan said. Not harshly. Just clearly, the way you state a fact that doesn't require emotion to be true. You ended a 4-year relationship by spending 7 months of it with someone else. You don't get to decide what Claire owes you or what the people in her life owe you. That debt ran out. Something moved through Daniel's face. He hadn't expected that either. I'm not trying to make this a whole thing, Daniel said, and now his voice had shifted slightly placating, slightly warning, the tone of a man who wants to de-escalate on his own terms. I'm just saying that whatever this is, it's not real. And you both know it. And I think it would be better for everyone, especially Claire, if we didn't let it go further than it already has. Better for Claire, Ethan repeated. She has a history of attaching herself to things that aren't healthy for her. Ethan looked at him steadily. I think what you mean, he said, is that she has a history of attaching herself to people who weren't healthy for her. That's a different statement, and it has a specific subject. The corridor was quiet. Daniel's jaw tightened. You really think she loves you, he said. And this time the satisfaction in his voice had a sharper edge. You've known her for what, a week? And you think you know her? You think this is real? I think, Ethan said, that you called her last week to get her to absolve you before your wedding. And I think it didn't work. And I think you've been watching us from across the room all night, because something about the way she's standing is bothering you. And I think you've come back here to try and crack something open, because you can't stand the idea that she's okay. Daniel stared at him. She's not just okay, Ethan said. She's better, and you know it. And that's the thing you actually can't stand. For a moment, Daniel said nothing, and in that nothing, Ethan saw it a flash of something genuine and unguarded, something that lived underneath the polished exterior. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was the specific discomfort of a man who had told himself a story about his own choices and had just heard it contradicted out loud in a way he couldn't quite refute. Then it closed. The composure came back down like a shutter. I'm going to tell them, Daniel said, at the reception. Tonight. I'm going to tell Claire's family and everyone here that this whole thing was staged. A pause. I think they deserve to know the truth. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Okay, he said. Daniel blinked again. Okay, you do what you feel you need to do, Ethan said. But understand that the only reason you're doing it is because it's the one card you have left. And playing it is only going to tell everyone in that room exactly who you are. He turned and walked back toward the reception. He found Claire within 60 seconds, not because he tracked her, because he had just known, somehow, where she would be. She was still with Marcus, though Jenna had moved away. He came to stand beside her, and Marcus looked at him with a question in his eyes, and Ethan gave him a small, steady look in return that said later, and Marcus, to his credit, read it perfectly and stayed where he was. Everything okay, Claire said quietly. We need to be prepared for something, Ethan said, equally quiet. She turned to face him. Her reading of his expression was fast and thorough, the nurse's instinct kicking in, assessing. What did he say? He knows, she didn't make a sound. But he watched the color shift slightly in her face. Lauren, not a question. Yes, her jaw set. How much? Enough. He's planning to say something. In front of everyone. The music was still playing. Someone on the dance floor laughed at something. The world of the reception continued completely indifferent to the fact that the floor beneath Claire Mitchell had just developed a crack. She was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then she straightened. Let him, she said. Ethan looked at her. Claire. I mean it. Her voice was low, but it was solid. I have been afraid of this man's opinion for 2 years. I have been managing my life around what he might think, what he might say, how he might make me look. I am done. She met Ethan's eyes directly. Whatever happens in the next hour, I need you to know that I am not ashamed of the choices I made this weekend. Any of them. The way she said any of them reached him somewhere he hadn't braced for. Understood, he said. Are you, she asked. Am I what? Ashamed, he held her gaze. Not even slightly, he said. She nodded, once. And then she reached out and took his hand, not the practiced, performative hold from earlier in the evening, but something deliberate, something chosen, and held it. Marcus looked at their hands. He looked at Ethan's face. And then he turned back to the room without comment. but the set of his shoulders said that he had understood something and had moved to a specific side. It happened 40 minutes later. The band had paused between songs, and the wedding coordinator had just handed the microphone back to the best man for a final toast when Daniel stepped smoothly into the gap. He took the microphone with the ease of a man accustomed to commanding rooms, smiled at his new wife with the performance of devotion, and then let his eyes move, casually, inevitably, across the gathering until they landed on Claire. "Before we close out the night," Daniel said, his voice warm and measured and carrying clearly to every corner of the room, "I want to say something. Because this night is about honesty and new beginnings. And I think honesty is important." Claire's hand tightened in Ethan's. He held it. "Some of you know Claire," Daniel continued. "She's someone who was part of my life for a long time, and I wish her nothing but good things. Truly." The sincerity in his voice was so well constructed it was almost convincing. "But I also believe in truth, and the truth is," he paused for effect. The room had gone quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when they sense something is happening that they should pay attention to. "The engagement you've heard about tonight isn't real," Daniel said. "The man Claire brought here, Ethan, he was asked to play a role. I know because I was told directly," a measured, sympathetic tilt of his head. "I'm not saying this to embarrass anyone. I'm saying it because I care about Claire, and I think everyone here deserves to know the truth about the people they're celebrating with." The silence after that was the kind that has mass and texture. Patricia Mitchell made a sound, not a word, just a breath, the specific sound of a mother, whose instinct is running ahead of her comprehension. Marcus went very still. Jenna's face did something complicated and quick. Bob said nothing, but his chin came up. Everyone looked at Claire. And then everyone looked at Ethan. Ethan felt it, the full weight of every set of eyes in the room, the crystalline, held breath, moment where the shape of the whole evening was about to be decided by whatever happened next. He let go of Claire's hand. She looked up at him, and for one terrible fraction of a second he saw it, the thing she'd been trying to protect against all weekend. The beginning of the fracture. The fear that this was exactly what she'd been afraid of all along. That she was about to be left standing alone in front of everyone who had ever expected it of her. Ethan stepped forward. He didn't rush. He walked steadily, the way he walked into his own shop every morning, like he belonged exactly where he was and knew exactly why he was there. He walked toward the center of the room, and people parted slightly without thinking about it, and he stopped about 10 feet from Daniel and looked at him, and then he looked at the room. Daniel looked uncertain for the first time all evening. He'd expected impact. He'd expected the floor to give way. He hadn't expected Ethan to walk toward him, like the revelation was an invitation. "He's right," Ethan said. His voice was even, it carried. The room impossibly went quieter. "Yes," he said. "It started as a fake arrangement. Claire asked me to come this weekend and play a role. She was honest with me about why. She was honest about the fact that she needed someone to stand beside her in a room full of people who had spent 2 years waiting for her to fall apart." He paused. "That's the truth. That part is true." He turned slightly and his eyes found Claire. She was standing very still. Jenna had moved next to her at some point, close enough to be a wall if she needed one. Claire's eyes were on Ethan, and they held the expression of someone watching something unfold that they are not certain they're going to survive. "But somewhere," Ethan said, and now his voice had changed, not louder, but more present, more certain, more something that didn't have a good name, but that everyone in the room could feel the shape of. Somewhere between learning her coffee order and already knowing why she says thank you twice. Somewhere between watching her talk about her patience and understanding that she is the kind of person who holds a stranger's hand for 40 minutes in an emergency room because she cannot bear for anyone to face something terrible alone. Somewhere in all of that, he stopped for just a beat. It stopped being fake. The room didn't move. "I don't know the exact moment," he said. "I don't have a timestamp. But I know that when I sat at her family's dinner table 3 nights ago, and her father asked me what I was proud of, the answer I gave him was true. Every word of it. And I know that when her sister asked me tonight if I was actually in love with her, the answer I gave her was also true." He looked at Daniel. "You told Claire she was just a performance," he said quietly. "That's what you told me in that corridor. That's what you've believed about her for 2 years, that she could be managed, minimized, explained away." A pause that lasted exactly long enough. "You were wrong. She's the least performed person I've ever met. And the fact that you couldn't see that is the thing I feel sorry for you about." Daniel's face had gone through 3 different expressions in the last 60 seconds, and none of them were the one he'd walked into the room with. Ethan turned back to Claire. The room was still a room. The music was still off. Patricia Mitchell had her hand pressed flat against her sternum. Marcus had uncrossed his arms. Bob was watching with the focused attention of a man who is measuring something carefully before he decides how he feels about it. "I know this isn't what we agreed to," Ethan said to Claire. To her specifically, in a room full of people, making it the most private conversation he'd ever had in public. "And I know you didn't sign up for me to say any of this out loud." But he was going to walk away from tonight believing that he had the last word on what you are and what you deserve. And I couldn't let that happen a beat. Even if it costs me the agreement we made. Claire's mouth was slightly open. She had not moved since he started speaking. "You can be angry at me later," he said. "But right now I need you to know that nothing I felt this weekend was performed. Not the dinner with your family. Not the conversation in the parking lot this morning. Not tonight." He stopped. None of it. The silence stretched. Across the room, Lauren, who had started this entire chain of events with her inability to keep something to herself, had gone the specific shade of pale that comes from realizing you may have made an enormous miscalculation. Sarah, Daniel's new wife, was looking at her husband with an expression that was not as warm as the one she'd had during the ceremony. And Daniel Whitmore was standing in the middle of his own wedding reception, holding a microphone he no longer knew what to do with, having aimed a grenade at Claire Mitchell's evening and somehow detonated it at his own feet. Patricia Mitchell said, from exactly where she was standing, without moving, in a voice that was quiet and cut like wire, "Daniel, give the microphone back." It wasn't a request. Daniel looked at her. Something in his face went through a rapid calculation and arrived at the conclusion that the social landscape of this room had shifted in a direction he had not anticipated and could not reverse. He handed the microphone back. Marcus said, just that. Just the one syllable. But from a man who said very little, it landed like a verdict. And then Claire moved. She walked toward Ethan the way people walk when they've stopped calculating and started deciding. Not fast, not dramatic, just directly, like there was a straight line between where she was and where he was, and everything else in the room was beside the point. She stopped in front of him. Up close, he could see that her eyes were bright but not broken. She looked like someone who had just walked through something she expected to destroy her and had come out the other side and was still standing, still herself, still whole. "You talked a lot," she said. "I know," he said. "You said a great deal of things I didn't ask you to say." "Yes, in front of a lot of people, I'm aware." She looked at him, searching, reading, the way she always read things straight through to the part that mattered. "Did you mean it?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Yes." She was quiet for one more moment, then she said, "I have spent 2 years making myself smaller. I have spent 2 years arriving at places like this alone and telling myself it was fine and that I didn't need anyone to choose me. I told myself I was okay with it." Her voice was steady, but it had something raw in it now, something she was choosing not to hide. "I wasn't okay with it. I was just surviving it." "I know," he said quietly. "I don't want to just survive it anymore," she said. "I want to actually want something. I want to stop being afraid of wanting something." "Okay," he said. "I want to stop pretending," she said. He looked at her. "So do I," he said. And then Claire Mitchell, who had walked into a coffee shop on a rainy Thursday night, asking a near stranger to lie for her, reached up and put her hand against the side of his face. And she kissed him. Not for the room, not for Daniel, not for the 2 years of quietly held grief, or the rehearsed backstory, or the envelope with the $800 she'd pushed across a counter. She kissed him because she wanted to. Because he had stood up in a room full of people and said the truth when he could have said nothing. Because he had come when she called and stayed when it mattered and meant every word he said, and asked for nothing in return except a favor she hadn't yet figured out. She kissed him. Because he was the first person in 2 years who had made her feel like being chosen was something she was actually allowed to have. The room erupted. Not all at once. It started with Jenna, who made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a cry, and covered her mouth with both hands. Then Patricia, who pressed her hand harder against her sternum, and looked up at the ceiling, the way people do when they don't want to cry in public and know they're losing the battle. Marcus said something under his breath that his wife immediately responded to by squeezing his arm. Bob Mitchell, at the edge of the room, nodded once, slow, certain. The nod of a man whose read on something has been confirmed. And somewhere behind all of that, in the specific silence of a man who has lost something he didn't know, he still wanted. Until someone else walked away with it, Dan stood on his own wedding night and watched. Ethan was aware of all of it at the edges. But in the center of it, in the only part that actually mattered there, was just Claire. Her hand on his face, the fact that she had chosen this, that she had chosen him. When she stepped back, her eyes were bright and her chin was up, and she looked like someone who had just put something down that she'd been carrying for a very long time. "I still owe you a favor," she said. He laughed. A real one, surprised out of him. "Yeah," he said. "You do." She took his hand, and they walked back toward her family together. Jenna got there first, pulling Claire into a hug that was more of a collision, saying something into her hair that made Claire laugh. Patricia arrived next, and she didn't say anything to Claire. First she looked at Ethan, and she took his hand in both of hers, and she held it for a moment, and that was all. Marcus looked at Ethan for a long moment, then he stuck out his hand. Ethan shook it. "Don't make me regret this," Marcus said. "I won't," Ethan said. "Good. You want some cake?" "They have a good cake." Ethan almost laughed again. "Yeah," he said, "I do." And the night continued. The band started up again. People found each other on the dance floor. The reception moved forward the way evenings do, when they've absorbed something unexpected and decided to continue anyway. Lauren disappeared at some point and didn't reappear. Sarah spent a long stretch of time speaking quietly to Daniel in a corner, and whatever she was saying, he was listening to it with the specific posture of a man who had arrived at a destination he hadn't planned on. Ethan didn't watch them. He had no interest in Daniel Whitmore's evening anymore. He stayed where he was, with Claire and her family, in the part of the room that felt, improbably, like the warmest corner in the entire place. At some point during a slow song, Claire leaned close to him and said quietly, "You know this made everything more complicated." "I know," he said. "We're going to have to talk about it." "I know, like actually talk about it, not with a rehearsed answer." "I know, Claire." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you scared?" He thought about that. "Yes," he said. "Me too," she said. And then she rested her head against his shoulder. The way she had done briefly in the corner of the room an hour ago, except this time it wasn't brief. This time she stayed, and he let her. And it had nothing to do with the agreement they had made. It had nothing to do with the envelope. Nothing to do with the weekend, or the performance, or the rehearsed timeline in Claire's spiral notebook. It had nothing to do with Daniel and what he thought, or what he'd tried to do, or what he'd ended up with. It had everything to do with a rainy Thursday night, and a woman with a hospital badge and exact change and $1 in the tip jar even on the bad days. And a man who had been paying attention without knowing that he was. And a moment, in the middle of someone else's wedding, where the most fake arrangement either of them had ever entered became, without ceremony or announcement, the most real thing in the room. The drive back to Charleston the next morning was different from the drive out. It was quieter. Not the careful quiet of two people managing a performance, not the tense quiet of someone bracing for impact. It was the quieter that comes after something large has passed through the specific stillness of air after a storm, when everything is washed clean and slightly rearranged, and the world looks familiar but isn't quite the same as it was before. Claire slept for the first 40 minutes. She hadn't meant to. Ethan could tell because she had started a sentence about something her mother said at the end of the night, and then the sentence had simply stopped. And when he glanced over, her head was against the window, and her breathing had gone slow and even. He turned the radio down without thinking about it, and drove and let her sleep, and didn't examine too carefully why that felt like exactly the right thing to do. She woke up when he stopped for gas about an hour outside of the city. She blinked, looked around, looked at him with the disoriented expressions of someone surfacing from a depth, and then said, "I fell asleep." "You did," he said. "Sorry, don't be." She rubbed her face with both hands and then looked out the windshield at the gas station and then back at him. "How long was I out?" "About 40 minutes, she made a small sound. "I haven't slept in a moving vehicle since I was a kid." A pause. "I don't actually sleep anywhere easily. I have a hard time turning my brain off." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "How do you know that?" He realized he'd said it automatically, from the same place where he kept all the other things he'd noticed about her without intending to. "You always have the same look when you come in before a shift," he said. "Like you've already been awake for 2 hours, thinking." She considered that. That's accurate, she said. She looked back out the windshield. My sister texted me 3 times already this morning. Good texts or complicated texts? Jenna texts, so both simultaneously. A small smile, she said, and I quote, I knew it before you did, which is annoying because she's probably right. Ethan went inside to pay and came back with 2 coffees, hers correct without asking, 1 pump vanilla. No foam. And she looked at the cup when he handed it to her, and something moved across her face that was quieter than the conversation they'd had the night before, but somehow reached further. Thank you, she said twice, the way she always did. He pulled back onto the highway and neither of them spoke for a while. And it was again the good kind of quiet. Then Claire said, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Okay, he said. She took a breath. He could feel her organizing herself the way she did. Before something difficult, not hesitating, just preparing. The way someone who works in emergency rooms learns to prepare, to collect themselves before they walk through the door, before whatever is on the other side of it. Last night was the most real I have felt in 2 years, she said. Maybe longer, and that scares me in a way I wasn't prepared for. Because when Daniel left, I told myself the reason it hurt so much was because I'd invested so much time. 4 years. I told myself it was about the investment, not the person. It was easier that way, a pause. But what I felt last night didn't have anything to do with time. We've known each other officially for about 5 days. And it was more real than 4 years of something I kept trying to make work. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. That terrifies me, she said. Because if it can be that real that fast, it can also fall apart that fast. And I don't know if I have another falling apart left in me. I used up a lot of them on Daniel. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not saying no, she said carefully. I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying no. I'm saying I'm scared, and I think you should know that before we decide what this is. He let the silence breathe for a moment before he answered. Can I respond now, he asked. Yes, I'm scared too, he said. A pause. You don't seem scared. I'm very scared, he said. I run a coffee shop. My last relationship ended because she said I was too steady. Her word, too steady, like consistency was a character flaw. He paused. I spent a year after that, wondering if she was right. If there was something in me that just didn't have enough range. Enough spark. Whatever the thing is that makes someone worth staying for. Claire had turned to look at him now and then. He said, a woman I'd been watching from across a counter for months walked in and asked me to do the straightest thing anyone had ever asked me to do. And instead of feeling outside my range, instead of feeling like more than I could handle it, felt like the first thing in a long time that made sense. He glanced at her briefly. You make sense to me, Claire, he said simply. I don't know how else to say it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, nobody has ever told me that before. That you make sense? That I make sense. Her voice had gone slightly rough at the edges. Daniel used to say I was too much, too emotional, too serious, too invested in the job, too focused on strangers instead of on us. Too much. And I spent 4 years trying to figure out how to be the right amount. A short pause. And you just said I make sense. You do, he said. She turned back to the windshield. She pressed her lips together briefly. Okay, she said. Okay, she said again. And then I want to try. Whatever this is, I want to try it like it's real. Because it already is, I think it already is. He exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said. Me too. She reached over and put her hand on his arm, not the performed hold from the wedding, not the studied, rehearsed physical closeness of 2 people executing an agreement. Just her hand on his arm, present, chosen. He drove. And neither of them said anything else for the rest of the way home, but the quiet between them had changed again. One more time. Into something that felt like the beginning of something, rather than the management of something. And that was the difference that mattered. Charleston welcomed them back with a particular September warmth it reserved for mornings that had no interest in letting summer go. Ethan dropped Claire at her apartment, and she got out and stood by the passenger door for a moment, with her bag over her shoulder, and her hair a little loose from the night before, and her eyes clearer than they'd been in any of the days he'd known her so far. So he said, I'll come in tomorrow morning, she said. Before my shift. I'll have your coffee ready, he said. She smiled. A real one, unguarded, the kind she probably didn't know she was doing. Don't make it perfect, she said. Leave something for me to complain about. Otherwise it feels like you're showing off. He laughed. I'll burn it slightly. Thank you. She held his gaze for a moment. Ethan. Yeah, what you said last night. In that room, she stopped. Started again. Nobody has ever done something like that for me. I want you to know that I know that, and I don't take it lightly." "I know you don't," he said. She nodded once, the way her father did the decisive nod that meant something had been established and didn't need to be repeated. Then she went inside. He sat in the truck for a moment before he drove away. Then he drove back to the shop and opened it up at his regular time, and Harold and Frank were in their corner booth within 20 minutes, and everything was exactly the same as it always was, and also completely different. And he didn't try to figure out the exact ratio of those two things, because some things are better felt than calculated. The next 3 weeks were not a movie montage. That's important to say because this story, told a certain way, could sound like it snapped together effortlessly. 2 people, 1 weekend, everything resolved. But the truth of what happened in the weeks after the wedding was messier and more real than that, and the mess was part of the reason it held. Claire came in every morning before her shifts, exactly as she'd said she would. At first, it was quick 10 minutes, the latte, a brief exchange, while Ethan worked the machine, and she leaned against the counter and talked about whatever was immediately in her head. The night she'd had, the patient she was worried about, the bureaucratic absurdity of hospital billing, small things, the kind of things that seem minor but are actually the whole texture of a life. Then 10 minutes became 20, then 20 became 30, and one morning she was still there, when his first batch of regulars arrived, and Harold looked over from his booth and said to Frank, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "That's the one." And Frank said, obviously, and neither of them pretended they hadn't been watching. Ethan also called her. Not just texted called, which felt deliberate in an era when calling someone was a statement of intent. He called her after shifts, knowing she'd be tired, not asking for anything, just being a voice on the other end of the line. She called him back when she got home. Sometimes they talked for an hour, sometimes for 10 minutes. One night, she fell asleep on the phone, and he sat there for a few minutes listening to her breathe, and then quietly said good night and hung up, and felt like an absolute idiot for how much that had meant to him. But there was also the harder stuff. Because 2 people who both have old wounds don't just decide to be fine all at once. They have good days and days where the old fear comes back wearing a new face. There was a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the wedding, when Claire went quiet for a day and a half and didn't return his texts quickly, and when he called she answered but sounded far away, like she was speaking from behind something. He didn't push. He texted once that evening, "I'm not going anywhere. Take whatever time you need." She called him back within 5 minutes. "I do that sometimes," she said. "I go away inside myself." Daniel used to say it was emotional unavailability. He said it like it was a diagnosis. "It's not a diagnosis," Ethan said. "It's what people do, when they've been hurt enough times to be careful." A long silence. "I don't want to hurt you," she said. "I'm aware that I am a complicated person, and that you signed up for a fake engagement and somehow ended up in something considerably more complex, and I don't want you to feel like you were tricked into a version of this that's harder than you bargained for." "Claire," he said, "I'm serious, I know you are. I also need you to hear me when I tell you that I am not the kind of man who runs from complicated. If I were, I would have told you we were closed when you walked in on a Thursday night." She didn't say anything for a moment. "The coffee shop is technically closed at 9 o'clock, she said quietly. "The sign was still up," he said. "You hadn't locked the door." "No," he said, "I hadn't." Another pause, and then she made a sound that was almost a laugh, soft and relieved and a little helpless. "You're making an extended metaphor out of an unlocked door," she said. "Is it working?" "Annoyingly, yes," she said. He smiled at the ceiling of his apartment. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll see you tomorrow morning." "Your coffee is still slightly burnt," she said. "I keep telling myself I'll fix that." "Don't," she said. "It's become part of the experience." He laughed, and they said good night, and when he put the phone down, he sat with the feeling of that conversations for a while, the specific gratitude of knowing that a difficult moment had been walked through and had come out the other side intact. That was the thing about Claire. She was honest even when honest was harder. She didn't perform okayness. She'd come in some mornings and say, "I had a bad night," without apology, without a long explanation, just the fact of it stated plainly. And he'd hand her the coffee and say, "I'm glad you're here," and she'd nod and drink, and by the time she left, she was a fraction more herself than when she arrived. He thought sometimes that this was the thing Daniel had missed, that what he'd labeled as too much was actually just Claire being present, being genuinely, uncomplicatedly present in whatever she was feeling, without the performance of having it all together. It was the quality he admired most in her. It was the quality that made him certain he was in serious trouble, in the best possible sense. The first real test came from a direction he hadn't anticipated. It was a Saturday, about 3 weeks after the wedding. The shop was busy. Saturday mornings always were. Harold and Frank in their corner, the usual parade of neighborhood people, a few newcomers who'd found the place on some local blog. Ethan was behind the counter, mid-rush, when the door opened and a woman walked in who stopped him completely cold. Her name was Diane. She was 34, wore her dark hair short now, and had the particular composure of someone who had made peace with a chapter of their life and moved through it. She looked the same. She also looked entirely different, the way people do when you haven't seen them in 3 years, and the absence has had time to settle into something neutral. Diane was the woman he had once planned to propose to, the one who had left first. She came up to the counter during a brief gap in the line and smiled genuinely, not with difficulty, and said, "Hi, Ethan." "Diane," he said. "I heard you were doing well," she said. "The shop looks great. I was nearby and I wanted to come in." A pause. "Is that okay?" "Of course," he said. "What can I get you?" She ordered. He made it. They exchanged a few minutes of the careful, considerate small talk of two people who once knew each other intimately and now exist in each other's lives as the specific category of important person who is no longer present. She asked about the business. He asked about her work. She mentioned she'd gotten married the year before. He told her that was great, and he meant it. And then she said, "I heard you were seeing someone." He looked up from the machine. "Yeah," he said, "I am." "Is it serious?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. Something moved through Diane's expression, not regret exactly, more like the confirmation of a thing she had already suspected. "Good," she said. She picked up her cup. "You deserve that, Ethan. You always did. I wasn't ready to receive what you were offering. That was my limitation, not yours." He looked at her. "I know that now," he said. "It took a while." She nodded. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," he said. And she left. He stood behind the counter for a moment, after the door closed, and thought about the fact that the thing he'd needed to hear from Diane for 3 years had just arrived on a Saturday morning, like the most ordinary delivery in the world. And the reason it no longer hurt the way he'd expected it to was because someone else had already quietly replaced what it was about. He picked up his phone and texted Claire. Nothing dramatic. "Just thinking about you." She texted back 7 minutes later from what he assumed was a hospital break room. "Good timing. Thinking about you too. Bad shift. Need coffee when I get off." He wrote back, "I'll be here." She sent back a single word, "Promise." He wrote, "Promise," and he was. She came in at 8:15 that night, still in her scrubs, looking like the day had taken everything she had, and asked for a little more besides. She sat on the stool on the customer side of the counter. The shop was empty by then, just the two of them, and wrapped her hands around the cup he'd already made, and didn't say anything for a few minutes. He waited. "I lost a patient today," she said finally. 51 years old. He came in with chest pain and we did everything right. Sometimes, that's just how it goes. Her voice was even, but her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was carrying, more than she was letting onto the surface. His wife was in the waiting room. "I had to go out and tell her." "I'm sorry," he said. "I've done it before. I'll do it again." "That doesn't make it easier." She looked up at him. "She grabbed my hand when I told her. She held it really hard. And all I could think was, who holds your hand when it's your turn to hear the terrible thing?" A pause. "I think about that a lot in my job. Who is holding whose hand?" Ethan looked at her across the counter. "I'd hold your hand," he said. She met his eyes. "I know," she said. "That's why I came here." They stayed there for a while, in the empty shop, with the closed sign on the door, and the low light, and her hands around the cup he'd made, and his hands on the counter near hers, not quite touching, but close enough that it was a choice either of them could make. She made it. She moved her hand and put it over his. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah, I haven't said it yet," she said. Out loud. As an actual sentence, not performed for anyone else, not implied, not surrounded by circumstances that made it easier to say. She looked at him steadily. "I want to say it without all of that around it." His heart was doing something his cardiovascular system was not entirely prepared for. "Okay," he said. "I love you," she said, plainly, clearly. Like a person saying a thing that is true. Not because of last weekend. Not because of what you said in that room. Before all of that. "I think I loved you when you pushed the envelope back and said, 'No money, just a favor.' I think something happened in me in that moment that I didn't have a name for yet. The shop was very quiet. I love you, he said back. No preamble, no qualification, because he had been holding it for a week, and it came out the way water comes out when you've been carrying it too long. I love the way you say thank you twice. I love that you tip on the bad days. I love that you drove to a stranger's dinner table and sat there with your spine perfectly straight and answered every hard question without flinching. I love that you knew, even when you were scared, what you were worth. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who has just arrived somewhere they had been trying to reach for a long time without knowing exactly where it was. We're very different, she said. Yes, he said. I'm going to have bad shifts and quiet days. And I'm going to go away inside myself sometimes and need you to not take it personally. I know. And I have a complicated relationship with the concept of asking for help, she said. I'm working on it. I know that too, and I'm not going to be easy, she said. Not because I don't want to be. Just because, Claire, he said gently. She stopped. I know, he said. I know all of it. And I'm here anyway. She closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, the last of the held tension in her face was gone. Not because everything was resolved. Not because the complicated parts had been simplified. But because she had said the hard thing, and he had heard it completely, and stayed exactly where he was. That was the moment. Not the kiss at the wedding, as public and significant as that had been. Not the speeches or the corridor confrontations or the things said in front of witnesses. This was the moment. In a closed coffee shop on a Saturday night, over a cup of coffee that was slightly burnt exactly the way she preferred it, with no one watching and nothing to perform and nothing to prove. This was when it became what it was going to be. Marcus called the following Thursday. Ethan almost didn't answer because he didn't recognize the number, but something made him pick up. And Marcus's voice came through direct and without preamble, the way Marcus did everything. So you're actually doing this, Marcus said. I am, Ethan said. You understand that if you hurt her, I'm going to find out about it. I do. And you understand that I'm saying that not as a threat but as a statement of fact about what will happen. Understood. A pause. Then in a completely different register she laughed yesterday. On the phone with me. Not the laugh she does when she's being polite. The other one. Another pause. She hasn't done that in a long time. Ethan didn't say anything. I don't say that to make you feel good about yourself, Marcus said. I'm saying it because you should know what you're responsible for now. I know, Ethan said. Good, Marcus said. And then she said your coffee is the best she's ever had. She tells me it's slightly burnt. She says that to everyone she loves, Marcus said. It's how you know, and he hung up. Ethan stood there holding the phone for a moment. Then he went back into the shop and made himself a coffee and thought about everything that had been set in motion by a rainy Thursday night, and an unlocked door and a woman who needed someone to stand beside her. And discovered she'd been standing next to him all along. He thought about the envelope still behind the counter. He had framed it the previous week. Not to be dramatic about it. Just because it seemed like the kind of thing that deserved to be marked. $800 in an envelope that had never been opened, mounted behind the register where he could see it every morning. His employee Carla had noticed it and asked what it was. He'd said, "That's how I met the most important person in my life." She'd looked at the envelope, then at him, then back at the envelope. In the envelope? No, he said. The envelope is just how I know the story was real. She had decided not to ask any follow-up questions. That evening, Claire texted him a photo, no caption. Just the photo. It was a picture of the tip jar by his register, taken from the customer side of the counter. In it, you could see the corner of the framed envelope in the background. He stared at it. Then he texted back, "When were you in here?" She wrote, "This morning before shift. You were in the back." "Carla let me take the picture," he wrote. "You could have said hi." She wrote, "You were busy. Also, I wanted to see what it looked like when you didn't know I was there." A pause. "Then you were singing something under your breath." He put the phone down, picked it up again. "What was I singing?" he typed. Her response took 30 seconds. "I don't know, but it sounded happy." He set the phone on the counter and looked at it for a moment, at the words on the screen, and felt, all at once, the full weight of what a single unlocked door had let in. The favor, it turned out, was the smallest part of the arrangement. The rest of it, every bit of the rest of it, was exactly what neither of them had agreed to, and exactly what both of them had needed. Part 5: The fake engagement that became a forever promise. 3 months after the wedding, Ethan's coffee shop felt different. Not in any way he could point to on a floor plan or explain in a lease renewal. Nothing had been renovated. The espresso machine was the same one his uncle had bought 9 years ago and complained about every single day he ran the place. The corner booth where Harold and Frank argued about football was still the corner booth. The tip jar by the register was still the tip jar. But the shop felt different because Ethan was different. And the people who came in every morning, the ones who had been watching him for years, quietly. The way regulars watch someone they've become genuinely invested in, they felt it before he said a word about any of it. Carla noticed first. She noticed everything first, which was either her greatest professional asset or the reason Ethan occasionally had to remind himself that she was an employee and not his personal biographer. It was a Wednesday morning, about 6 weeks after the wedding, and she had been watching him for approximately 40 minutes before she put down the cloth she was using to wipe the counter and said, without looking up, "You're different." Ethan was pulling a shot. "I'm the same," he said. "You hum," she said. He stopped. "I don't hum." "You've been humming for 6 weeks," she said. "Under your breath, while you work. You didn't do that before." She finally looked up. "And you check your phone differently." "I check my phone the same way I've always checked my phone." "Before you checked it hoping something was there," she said. "Now you check it knowing something's there and just wanting to see what it says." She tilted her head. "It's a completely different energy." He looked at her for a moment. Then he went back to the espresso machine. "Make sure the pastry case is stocked," he said. "That's not a denial," she said pleasantly, and went to stock the pastry case. Harold and Frank, for their part, simply absorbed the information, as though it confirmed something they had established between themselves long before it became official. One Saturday morning, about 2 months in, Claire came in during their usual corner booth session, and Ethan brought coffee over and they stood together for a moment near the register talking about something low and private. And when he came back behind the counter, Harold looked up from whatever argument they were mid-sentence in and said, "Good," and then went right back to the argument. Frank didn't even look up, just said about time, and that was the entire acknowledgement, which was, from Harold and Frank, practically a standing ovation. Claire's mornings in the shop had become the structural center of Ethan's day, in a way he hadn't planned for and couldn't imagine reorganizing. She came in before every shift, usually between 6 and 6:30, and the first 10 minutes were always quiet. Her hands around the cup, him behind the counter, finishing the opening setup, neither of them requiring anything from the other, except the basic comfort of being in the same room. Then she'd start talking, whatever was immediately in her head, the patient she was already worried about. Something her sister had sent her at midnight. A question she'd been carrying since the day before, that she hadn't had anyone to ask until now. He listened the way he had always listened, fully, without interrupting, without immediately trying to solve, which was something she had told him early on was rarer than it should be. Most people hear the beginning of the problem and start building the solution before you've finished explaining it, she said once. They're so busy helping that they stop listening halfway through. "Does it bother you?" he asked. "It used to feel like kindness," she said. "Now it just feels like impatience wearing a kind face." He nodded. "I don't know how to fix most of the things you deal with at work," he said. "So I just listen." She had looked at him with the expression she got sometimes when he said something she needed to sit with. "Don't sell that short," she said. "That's not nothing. That's actually everything." He thought about that conversation on a lot of mornings, about the way she had said everything with the same flatness she used for facts. Not performing gratitude, not constructing a compliment, just stating what was true. It was the way she loved. He was beginning to understand that, direct, undecorated, and permanent once given. The first time he met her outside of Charleston was a weekend trip she'd arranged to visit a nursing school friend in Savannah, and she had asked him 3 days before if he wanted to come, casual enough that he'd almost missed the weight of it, until he realized she wasn't asking casually at all. She was asking carefully, because she was inviting him into a part of her life that predated him, and that was a different kind of vulnerability than a wedding weekend with enemies watching. He said yes immediately. She exhaled in a way that told him she'd been holding her breath about it. The friend's name was Diane, different Diane from his past. A coincidence he found privately uncomfortable but said nothing about, and she was warm and direct, and within 30 minutes of meeting Ethan, she had pulled Claire aside in the kitchen and said something that made Claire come back to the living room with her ears slightly pink. He didn't ask what was said. Claire volunteered it that night. She said you have the eyes of someone who means what they say. She said she could tell within 5 minutes a pause. She also said it was about time I stopped letting guilt about Daniel stop me from wanting good things. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Were you, he asked. Letting guilt stop you? Claire thought about it honestly, the way she did with hard questions, taking the time to actually look at the answer before she gave it. A little, she said. Not guilt exactly. More like I didn't think I was allowed to be happy about how things turned out. Because if I was happy, it meant the whole thing had worked out for the best. And if it worked out for the best, did I have the right to still be angry about how it happened? Yes, he said. Both things can be true. She looked at him. Both things can be true, she repeated slowly, like she was trying the words for size. The way it happened was wrong, he said. What you went through was real, and it hurt, and you had every right to be angry. And also separately, at the same time, what happened after it is good. Those two facts don't cancel each other out. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I really needed to hear that. I know, he said. How did you know? Because you've been carrying the second half of that sentence for months, he said. I could tell. She shook her head slightly, not negatively. More like someone marveling at something. You pay attention, she said. To you, he said. Yes. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They were sitting on the small back porch of her friend's house, the night warm around them, the city making its quiet sounds below, and neither of them needed to fill the silence, because the silence itself was full. The twist that neither of them saw coming arrived on a Tuesday in November. It arrived in the form of a phone call to Ethan at 7:40 in the morning, while he was behind the counter, from a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. Something made him answer. The voice on the other end was a woman's, measured, a little tired, unmistakably familiar even though he had only been in her presence for a single evening. Ethan, she said, this is Sarah. The shop was busy enough that he had to step into the back. He stood in the small hallway near the office door and said, Sarah. I know this is strange, she said. I got your number from Lauren, which I understand is ironic given the circumstances. He didn't say anything. I wanted to call. She stopped. Started again. I owe Claire an apology. I've known that for 2 years and I've been a coward about it. And I thought I don't know why. I thought this. I thought maybe if I said it to you first, I could figure out if it was worth saying to her. Whether she'd even want to hear it. Ethan leaned against the hallway wall. That's not my call to make, he said. That's hers. I know, Sarah said, I know that. I just a pause. Her voice had something raw underneath its composure. The sound of someone who has been managing a weight for a long time. She was my best friend for 12 years and I destroyed that. And I've been telling myself for 2 years that I've made peace with it because that's the easier thing to tell yourself. But seeing her at the wedding, another pause. She looked whole. She looked more whole than I've ever seen her. And I realized that whatever she has now, she has it because she got out of something that was making her smaller. Something I helped create. Ethan was quiet. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Sarah said. I understand that's not something I get to request. I just want her to know that I know what I did, and that I'm sorry. Actually sorry. Not the kind of sorry that's about making myself feel better. He stood in the hallway for a moment, thinking. I'll tell her you called, he said finally. What she does with that is up to her. That's fair, Sarah said. Thank you for listening. He went back into the shop, finished the morning rush, and texted Claire at 10 o'clock. Call me when you get a break. Nothing wrong. Just something you should know. She called at 10:22 from what sounded like a supply closet. You said nothing wrong, she said immediately. But your tone in the text was not nothing wrong. Sarah called me this morning, he said. The line went quiet. She wants to apologize, he said. To you. She asked me to. I think she wanted to find out if you'd be open to hearing it. Another silence, longer. What did you tell her? Claire asked. That it was your call, he said. Not mine. He could hear her breathing. The specific rhythm of Claire Mitchell, thinking something through, not reacting, not performing, actually turning it over. I don't know yet, she said finally. That's okay, he said. I'm angry, she said. I'm still angry. I think I'll always be a little angry. That's fair, he said. But I'm also, she stopped. I don't want to carry it anymore. I don't want their names in my mouth every time I think about that chapter of my life. I want to just be done with it. Those two things can both be true, he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. You keep saying that. Because you keep needing to hear it. A pause. I'll think about it, she said. The Sarah thing. I'll actually think about it. No promises. No promises needed, he said. Yeah. Thank you for telling me, she said. And for telling her it was my call, always, he said. She went back to her shift. He went back to the counter. And the day moved forward the way good days do, carrying its weight evenly. Claire did call Sarah back. 3 weeks later. Ethan didn't know the details of that conversation and didn't ask, because it wasn't his conversation to know. What he knew was that Claire came into the shop the morning after and ordered her coffee and stood at the counter and said, I talked to her. How do you feel, he asked. Like I put something down, she said. Something I didn't realize I was still carrying. He made her coffee and slid it across the counter, and she wrapped both hands around it and stood there for a moment in the good silence. And he thought that was one of the things he loved most about her. The way she knew the difference between a problem being solved and a wound being healed, and understood that those were two different timelines, requiring two different kinds of patience. The moment that Ethan understood with complete certainty what the rest of his life was going to look like came on a morning in December. He was opening the shop before sunrise, alone the way he always was in those first quiet minutes before Carla arrived. He was running through the opening routine machine calibration, pastry case, register, the small motions he had done so many times they lived in his hands, rather than in his head, when his phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Claire, 5:48 in the morning. It said, I'm outside, but I forgot my key to the shop. He stopped. He stood there for 1 second, thinking about what she had just said. Then he walked to the front door and unlocked it and opened it, and she was standing there, in her scrubs, coffee cup from home already in hand, slightly sheepish, her hair not quite finished. I forgot, she said. I put it in my other bag. He looked at her. You have a key, he said. I know I have a key, Ethan. I just said I forgot it. You have a key to my coffee shop. She blinked. Yes, you gave it to me 6 weeks ago, so I didn't have to wait outside when you were in the back. Why are you? She stopped. Because she saw it on his face. Whatever was happening in his expression, she read it the way she read everything about him now. Directly, without lag. Oh, she said quietly. You have a key to my shop, he said. And you call when you're on a hard shift. And your shampoo is in my bathroom, because you leave it there. And your handwriting is on the grocery list on my refrigerator. He paused. And I hum, he said apparently. She was very still in the doorway. I don't know when that happened, he said. Any of it. I don't have a timestamp. But it happened the way everything between us has happened, without asked permission, and without making a production of itself. Ethan, she said. I love you, he said. I know I've said that. But I want to say it right now in the context of you standing on my front step at 5:48 in the morning, because you forgot the key that has started to belong to you as much as it belongs to me. He stopped, took a breath, and I want to ask you something. The December morning was cold around her. She hadn't moved from the doorway. Her coffee cup was still in her hand. Her eyes were doing the thing they did when something was landing somewhere important. Ask, she said. Move in, he said. Not because it's practical, not because it's the next logical steps in some sequence, not because it makes financial sense. Because you already are in. Because you forgot your key and called me, and I walked to the door, and you were there, and that's the whole picture. That's what I want every morning to look like. She stared at him. That's not a question, she said. You said ask you something. That was a statement, Claire. You said ask. Will you move in with me, he said. She pressed her lips together. He could see her trying not to smile and losing completely. That took you long enough, she said. Is that a yes? That is absolutely a yes, she said. I've been waiting for you to say that for 3 weeks. He laughed. 3 weeks. I was ready 3 weeks ago, she said. I didn't want to push. You could have just said something. So could you? He held the door open wider. Come in, he said. Your coffee is burning. She walked past him into the shop and then stopped and turned and looked at him with the full weight of her attention, the nurse's gaze that went straight through surfaces to the thing underneath. I need you to know something, she said. What? When I walked into this shop on a rainy Thursday and put that envelope on your counter, she said, I was the most afraid I had been in years. Not of Daniel, not of the wedding, of wanting something again and being wrong about it. She paused. I wasn't wrong. No, he said. You weren't. You pushed the envelope back, she said. You didn't want the money. You just wanted a favor. And I remember thinking, who does that? Who helps a stranger for a favor they might never collect on? Someone who already wanted to be there, he said. Her eyes were bright. Yeah, she said softly. I figured that out eventually. The favor, as it turned out, took 6 months to be called in. It was a Sunday afternoon in the following spring, and they were in the shop after closing a habit they'd developed. The quiet end-of-weekend hour when the last customer had gone and the chairs were up. And they moved through the space together, the way people move through spaces that belonged to both of them. Claire was wiping down tables. Ethan was behind the counter running the end-of-day numbers. So he said. "I've been thinking about the favor," she said. He looked up from the register. "The favor, the one I've owed you since October." She set the cloth down. "No money, just a favor. I believe those were the terms." He leaned on the counter. "They were," he said. "I've thought about what to ask for," she said. "And I've narrowed it down." "Okay, it's big," she warned. "Tell me." She walked to the counter. Stopped on the other side of it, the same position she'd been in on a rainy Thursday night when Starvrith answered the counter between them. Like the beginning of a sentence, neither of them had known yet how to finish. She reached into her jacket pocket. She put something on the counter. He looked at it. It was a small box, simple, dark wood, no ribbon. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "Claire," he said. "I want to call in the favor," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were very bright. "The favor is I want you to open that box, and I want you to say yes. Because I have spent months watching you choose me. Every single day, in every small way that matters more than any grand gesture. And I want to stop waiting to ask for what I already know I want." He didn't move for a moment. "You're proposing to me," he said. "I am proposing to you," she confirmed, "in your coffee shop. At the end of a Sunday, with no audience and no performance and no one watching. Because the moment is ours, and I don't want to share it with anyone who isn't us." He recognized the words. He had said them to her family months ago, inventing a fake proposal, describing what a real one would look like, and she had written it in her spiral notebook, and apparently decided to give it back to him. His throat did something it had no business doing. He opened the box. Inside was a simple band, dark, clean lines. No extravagance, no performance, just the thing itself. He looked at it, then he looked at her. "Yes," he said. Immediately. Without hesitation. With every piece of certainty he had ever accumulated about anything in his entire life. "Yes," she exhaled. Long, slow everything. He came around the counter. He did not vault over it. Though later, she would tell people he practically did, and she met him halfway, and he held her the way you hold someone when the thing you wanted most has just arrived, and you're still slightly amazed that it's real. "I love you," she said into his shoulder. "I love you," he said. They stayed like that for a while, in the empty shop, with the closed sign on the door, and the framed envelope behind the register and the chairs still up on the tables. Carla found out Monday morning. She walked in, looked at Claire's hand, looked at Ethan's face, set down her bag, and said, finally, with such profound satisfaction that Harold, already in his corner booth, raised his coffee cup in a toast without looking up. Frank said, "About time," for the second time in the history of this story. And Marcus called that afternoon and said nothing for a full 3 seconds when Claire told him, and then said, "Good. Now he can't leave," and Claire laughed so hard she had to sit down. Patricia cried. "The proper kind. Unrestrained. On the phone." Bob said, in his quiet, decisive way, "That's the right answer." Jenna texted Ethan directly, "I knew it before you did. Both of you. I knew it in the dining room." He texted back, "I know." She sent back, "You're welcome." He smiled and put the phone down and went back to making coffee, which was what he did every morning, which was the whole of his simple, and now completely transformed life. The envelope stayed framed behind the register. Customers asked about it sometimes. First-timers mostly, the ones who hadn't heard the story yet. And Ethan would tell it, or Claire would tell it if she was there. And sometimes they'd tell different parts of it, and the parts would fit together, the way things fit, when they're both made from the same truth. He told it the way people tell stories that changed everything, not to make it sound more than it was, but to keep sure the real weight of it got through. The rain the Thursday night, the envelope on the counter. A woman who needed someone to stand beside her and discovered she'd been standing next to him all along. A man who had learned to pay attention without knowing what he was paying attention for. A fake engagement that never quite managed to be fake. A favor that cost nothing and returned everything. Because the truth about Ethan Brooks and Claire Mitchell was not that they fell in love, in spite of how they began. It was that they were honest with each other in a situation that invited them to perform. And honesty, given the right two people and a single unlocked door, has a way of becoming the most permanent thing in a life. They had started with a lie, and the lie had led them, without detour, without compromise, without a single moment either of them would take back, straight to the only truth that had ever mattered. That some people walk into your life under the wrong pretense and stay for exactly the right reasons. And that is not an accident. That is the whole story.